Tech is looking for redemption after suffering a 15-point loss to Oklahoma in Norman. How the Red Raiders will respond in Lubbock coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our channel, I highly recommend you do that now. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News, and I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst and writer. Today, we are talking Oklahoma. Obviously, I think the Sooners left a little bit of a bitter taste in Texas Tech's mouth the last time these two teams faced each other. Obviously, with Oklahoma coming out on top by 15, which was one of the hardest games to watch all season, in my opinion, from Texas Tech. Just was really not pretty. Had to rely on Kevin McCullough for pretty much everything offensively, but Red Raiders will be looking to even the score. Obviously, they've had kind of an up and down past few games since they played Texas Tech in Norman. Emery, what have you been seeing from the Sooners over the last couple of days and weeks?
Well, they really have just yet to be able to consistently put together a string of games. I really thought after they beat Tech in Norman that it was going to be the start of their turnaround. And the next game against Kansas, they played Kansas right to the wire in Fall Gallon and had a shot to win that game late, went on a bit of a dry spell. And in that one, it was kind of the inverse of what happened in the first game against Tech, where this time it was Umoja Gibson who got in foul trouble, like Tanner Groves did in the Tech game. And it was Groves who was able to really kind of carry them in that game. And so I thought, this would be, they barely lost that game with Gibson not playing too well. So I figured, they could start a continuous run, but it just seems like they haven't been able to put things together. They lost in overtime to Texas, real close game there, and then just fell apart against Iowa State. And, this Oklahoma team, it reminds me of a Tech team in the past few years. I'm curious to see if you can guess what that team is, because I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of how their seasons played out.
Man, first Chris Beard year, 16-17?
Exactly it. And I think it's like a really obscure sort of similarity here. But if you remember back to that team, they had a stretch of games in, I believe it was February, where they played Kansas at home, lost that one right at the wire. They played Baylor at home, won that one in a close game. Played West Virginia on the road, barely lost that. Lost to Iowa State in double overtime. So you had a series of games against all ranked teams. They were barely losing. And that's been the way that this Oklahoma team has been. They've been able to knock off a couple really good opponents this year. I mean, they beat Arkansas and really kind of decimated Arkansas in a neutral site game. And obviously they beat Tech. They've had success against teams like Iowa State, but being able to consistently put it together has just been something they've struggled with. And they've been in almost every game they've played, but they just cannot seem to figure out a way to win the games. And it's tough because I really think this is a talented OU roster. Obviously, they've had some injury issues lately, but certainly just it's been rough. And I think that they're kind of fighting for their tournament lives now. And certainly that's not something that you would have expected coming into the year with a team with that amount of talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 16-17 comp is really good. I mean, it's a team that's implementing a new scheme. They're trying to do a lot of different things. You've got some experienced guys on the roster, some new pieces that you're just trying to figure out how to make it fit. And I think there could even be an argument that the Texas Tech game was when Oklahoma started to turn things around. I know that obviously they've lost games, but that Kansas game was a really close loss. They took Texas into overtime. They just got smothered by Iowa State in a way that I still don't really understand. But I think that they have looked better. I think that they're figuring things out. They're still trying to find a consistent way to win games. I think that their defense continues to look pretty good. But again, I think that 16-17 comp is really fair, especially considering the fact that they just have not been able to find ways to win games. And it's been really hard to watch. Just them kind of fall apart in games where it feels like they could have a chance against teams that on paper look a lot better than you. And I think that really one of the keys to the game in the first game, in my opinion, was Oklahoma's ability to force Texas Tech into turnovers while not turning the ball over themselves. Oklahoma is one of the worst turnover teams in the country, and they just put Texas Tech in a really tough position at Norman.
Yeah, and specifically looking at that game, their ability to double the post and really make life miserable for Bryson Williams was something that many other Big 12 teams have kind of tried to some degree and failed at, but their ability to flawlessly rotate, I think that forced a lot of issues with Tech. Now, granted, Tech missed some open three-point shots in that one that really kind of turned the tide against them, but certainly for Oklahoma's strategy, it was something that they really kind of maximized their defense on that game, and it was not really a fluke because they were forcing Tech into bad decisions offensively. And then on their end, they were able to generate open looks from three. And I think that's something that we've seen Oklahoma do at times throughout the season. They've run really efficient offense. It's been being able to consistently get into it and have ball handlers that are able to take care of the ball. We mentioned this in the first preview. That's been the struggle they've had. And in the first game, they did struggle with turnovers still. They had, especially in the first half, a lot of turnovers that led to Tech points and fast break opportunities, but they were able to get it sorted away in the second half and kind of figure things out offensively. And this is a dangerous team. This is a team that has a fair bit of playmakers, fair bit of guys that can make their own shot and can hit tough looks. Obviously, you were going to talk about Umoja Gibson, but beyond that, I mean, you've got Goldwire, who's one of the best two-way guards out there, in my opinion. You've got Tanner Groves, who kind of had an off game in the first matchup, but is always a threat. And I mean, this Oklahoma team is talented. I'm super high on Porter Moser. I've mentioned that the last couple of weeks, but I think that he's one of the best game plan coaches out there in America. And I mean, I'm not sure if this team is ready yet to be on a team like Tech's level, and I think we might see that this week, but certainly going forward in the next couple of years, this is going to be a program to really keep your eyes on.
And I feel like that big Oklahoma win, obviously, whenever you have a team beat you that, I mean, by all accounts, you're probably better than. Like, I think that's a fair thing to say that Texas Tech is the better team here. There's obviously a lot of variance that goes into that, but I do think that Porter Moser did a lot of good things in this game. As I mentioned before, he created a lot of Texas Tech turnovers while finding a way to not turn the ball over on his team. And then another thing that I thought was really big in this one was Oklahoma's ability to win on the glass. They had a turnover rate that was almost 10 percentage points higher than Texas Tech's. That's been an asset for the Red Raiders all season. And for him to take that away and turn that into a strength for his own team was a really big point in this game. Obviously, Jalen Hill, their forward, he was really active on the glass against Texas Tech, and I think that that's something to watch once again in this game.
Yeah, and in general, Oklahoma doesn't strike you as a team that would be great on the boards per se. I mean, certainly their roster is not heavily dependent on bigs, and the stats bear it out. They're kind of an average rebounding team. But in the first game, they were able to match Tech on the boards. I think offensively, a lot to do with that happened to be kind of the defensive scheme that they ran against Tech and just being able to force Bryson Williams into being confronted in the paint. You really didn't see a ton of switching per se. It was more so purely just putting a lot of pressure on the ball. And so the typical opportunities where you see Tech really crash the glass happens when you have switches, when you have mismatches in terms of the size of the lineup. And Oklahoma really didn't have either of those. They had a couple of long, lengthy wings out there, and they generally were able to play straight up defense, and their rotating was so good that it kind of prevented the offensive glass. I do think that could be something that might be a little bit different without Elijah Harkless in this game, but certainly you're looking at a team that has the personnel on the perimeter and make life difficult regardless of who they're facing. And again, I think offensively their game plan as well was really smart and being able to kind of swing the ball around, and they sort of mitigated the impacts of not having the ball handling ability to really drive effectively. And that's something in this game Tech is going to have to really figure out ways to exploit, whether that be putting more full court pressure on, whether that be maybe playing a more aggressive style of half court defense, or whether it simply be playing a little bit of Oklahoma's game in terms of putting more extreme rotations in. And obviously Tech has done that with avoiding middle drives, and certainly they do put a lot of pressure on bigs in the post, but Oklahoma's not a team that posts a ton. And so that sort of strategy we've seen against guys like Timmy Allen isn't quite as effective here, and I think that that's something to watch out for.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really, really interesting factors that go into this game. Obviously, you mentioned Harkless. He's a guy that we've got to touch on because he is out for the rest of the year. We're going to talk about him and a number of other individual Oklahoma players coming up in our next segment. Football might be over for this season, but betonline.net has all the props odds that you need. From both pro and college hoops, which are in full swing, there's the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to even where the next fired coach is going to land. Maybe it'll be Jawan Howard, who knows? BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, and it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our channel, I highly suggest that you do that now. We are here talking Oklahoma versus Texas Tech. Obviously, I think the guy that everyone wants to talk about, considering that we're previewing Oklahoma and it kind of makes sense, is Umoja Gibson. Just given the fact that even though he may not be the best player on Oklahoma's roster, he really, really hurt Texas Tech in that first matchup. I know that we talked about him on our preview pod. I remember we talking about, hey, this is a guy that's a threat. He makes shots. He's a good player, and he scored 30 against Texas Tech, and it was an easy 30. I mean, I think he went 8 of 13 or 8 of 11 from deep, rather. He hasn't been as consistent. You mentioned the Kansas game, fouled out in that one, only played 20 minutes, and then since then, he scored 17 against Texas, got a little bit of his rhythm back, but in Iowa State, the game where Oklahoma got thrashed, he went 0 for 4 from the field, and once again found himself in foul trouble. So he's got 13 fouls in his last 3 games. And I think that that's something to really, really watch in this game, especially considering the fact that he had 0 against Texas Tech in his 30-point performance.
Yeah, I think fouls are largely a form of variance for the most part in perimeter guys. I mean, unless you're talking about a Clarence Adomley type that's extremely aggressive. And I mean, Gibson's been a good defender. I think watching the Kansas game, if I remember correctly, the first couple of minutes he picked up a couple that were more or less fluky plays. Or it wasn't like he was being overly ambitious or anything. It just kind of happened in the flow of the game. And sort of similar deal against Texas. He racked up 4, but that was an overtime game. So you kind of saw a lot of attrition. So I'm not really sure if the foul trouble is going to be something to necessarily like absolutely plague him, but it is something worth noting because someone having 0 fouls in one game and then turning right around and basically playing the entire game in Allen Fieldhouse in foul trouble was something that was really crazy to watch. And I think, I mean, the game that he had in Norman, 8 of 11 for 3, that's variance regardless of how open he was. And certainly he had some open shots, but he also hit some contested ones. And just being able to have that much efficiency as a shot maker, and especially when he had kind of been struggling coming into the Tech game. He was shooting about 36% coming into the game. And even afterwards, he's had 2 games that he's kind of struggled with. And then to be able to have that kind of performance, it was incredible. And it's something that he's capable of. I don't want to kind of give this assumption away that he's not someone that can put up 30 on a somewhat consistent basis, but you're not going to see him lighting up for 8 of 11 from 3 again in this game. And if you want to quote me on that, and if I end up being wrong, then so be it. But he basically had one of the best games that we've seen against the Tech defense. I'd even argue if you're talking pure efficiency, the only game that is really comparable is the Maceo Teague.
Oh,
yeah,
I want to beat you.
Come on. But yeah, Maceo Teague's the only guy that I can think of that came close. And even then, that was a team in Baylor that had 3 elite guards. I mean, so it wasn't like Tech could really scheme. In this game, in the last game, Umoja Gibson's probably their only above average 3-point shooter outside of Groves. And even Tanner Groves was kind of in foul trouble, didn't play a whole lot. So, I mean, that game was sensational from him. And I think that there's a lot that he can take from that and kind of getting used off the ball and being able to create. But certainly 8 of 11 is an anomaly. I'd be shocked if that happens again. But wow, that was, from a neutral standpoint, that'd be a lot of fun to watch. But I'd never want to watch that game again and watch what he did to Tech. That was rough.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it is variance, and I think that that's obviously fair to say. Like Macio Teague making whatever it was, 13 threes in a game was obviously variance as well. But I think that there's also an element, and I know that this is what you're kind of hitting on here. There's also an element that is skill and that is scheme. And I think that we really saw Porter Moser really find a way to get into Texas Tech scheme. I think especially one thing he saw on the film that he scouted really, really well was their aggressiveness. And I think Texas Tech might have been so sold out to protecting the inside in that game because that is where Oklahoma is nationally good. I mean, they're still fourth in 2 point percentage, I think. I think that Moser probably saw a leverage opportunity given how aggressive Texas Tech was going to protect the inside, which is why we saw a lot of lapses in the rotation, a lot of guys leaving their feet. I think that that was something that Moser did really, really well. Now, on the other bench, I thought Mark Adams and his staff just completely schemed Tanner Groves out of this game. And it was a really, really impressive, just something to watch in terms of what this staff was able to do. I think that this is maybe one of the best scouting staffs I've ever watched or covered. Just their ability to completely scheme opposing players out of games. It's remarkable. And obviously, it would be foolish of me to talk about Tanner Groves not getting into this game and not mentioning the foul trouble. He picked up 4 fouls and I think 12 minutes of play. So he was in trouble, man. But that's not completely an accident. I mean, we're mentioning here like fouls obviously do have variance. It depends on who's officiating the game that night. That's going to depend on what you get called for. But there is also a deliberate effort on opposing sidelines to attack guys you know have a tendency to get into foul trouble, and that's been Groves this season. And I mean, he had a big game against Kansas once again, and since then he only had 4 against Texas and 7 against Iowa State. So I feel like he's in a little bit of a rough patch right now. But I think that just given what Mark Adams and his staff were able to do in the first game against Groves, I think gives you confidence to think that they can maybe do something again. Maybe he won't only have one bucket again, but the fact that you can, scheme around him not being a guy that's going to go scorched earth, I feel like is a fair assumption to make at this point.
Yeah. Whatever it is about stretch bigs and post bigs that Mark Adams and company have been able to scheme against, I have to say it's been remarkable. And this is not just a one-time thing. I mean, you look at Groves, you look at Steele Venters in the Eastern Washington game, had to be the first guy I brought up because of the Eastern Washington connection. You have Nate Watson, you have obviously Timmy and Holmgren in the Gonzaga game. Obviously, I've been on record about what Tech's able to do to David McCormick, like every time they face him. I mean, you have a long Timmy Allen as well. Like you have a long list of guys that Adams has just schemed out of games this year. And I didn't see anything from the first game that would make me think that Groves is going to have any sort of different approach in this game that can kind of free him up, because I think what Tech was doing is something that they've been doing to different bigs. They've been rotating so fast whenever they post up that it kind of makes it difficult for them to create their own shot. And Groves is not a passing big that's to the level of someone that would be able to really exploit that. And then whenever they play him in face up, Groves is not someone that is quick enough to necessarily like exploit mismatches in that sense. And I just think that he's a good shooting big, and certainly if there's one way that he's going to hurt you, it's going to be in the catch and shoot game and off of maybe pick and pops. But again, that's where Oklahoma's lack of ball handling kind of comes in as a little bit of a detriment, especially with Elijah Harkless out. And I think that that's something that if you're looking at one difference in this game, Umoja Gibson's going to have to play more on the ball. That's one thing, because Goldwire, he picked up some foul trouble in the first matchup. And even if he didn't, even if he's playing a lot, he's still someone that really can't create it for himself from three. He's not a great pull-up shooter. And so you're not going to want him to run the offense every single possession because he's naturally more of a combo in the first place. So Gibson having to be more on the ball is going to help out, I think, because he's not necessarily the natural playmaker that you would expect out of a main guard. So in general, not having Harkless, who's kind of the do-it-all versatile sort of, probably the most versatile of their three guards that get a lot of minutes. That's something that I think is going to play into this game that you had to really deal with in Norman, just because of the kind of nature of having those three guards all playing in the lineup and all capable of being PBHs.
Yeah, obviously, Harkless done for the year. It's a big, big loss for Oklahoma. He was the second leading scorer in the first contest in Norman. And so I think that his loss is something to continue to watch throughout the rest of Oklahoma's short season, whatever is left. But I think that's also something that I'm going to be watching for in this game, just given that he has the ability to space the floor. He's not necessarily a high usage guy from deep, but he is a very capable shooter from that range. So I think that his loss is definitely something to monitor. I want to get into our predictions and our keys to the game for this next rematch, but first, another word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Rock Auto is also a family business serving do it yourself customers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. All right. Talking Texas Tech, Oklahoma. Emory, I have a little bit of a theory about something that you mentioned in that last segment. I don't think that it's worthy of 2 minutes of our time, but I'm going to do it anyways. You mentioned that Texas Tech has been able to scheme around bigs, also primarily stretch bigs really, really well, and I think I know why. What would you say is the weakest area of Texas Tech's defense, especially given the no middle scheme that's run?
I would say it's got to be skip passes to the corner, especially when you have elite guards that are able to beat their man off the dribble. I think we saw it. If you look at the teams that Tech has struggled against over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been teams that have the multiple guards that are able to find guys in the corner, kind of teams that also thrive off of hockey passes. That would be kind of my answer to that question.
Yeah, corners was the term I was looking for, the area I was looking for. And I mean, where do we see primarily stretch big men getting the most of their three-point shots?
Not in the corner.
Top of the key. That's right.
Top
And so
of
I
the key
feel
or
like
the wings.
yeah, and I feel like this is a very intentional strategy by Mark Adams because what you're doing here is you're essentially taking guys out of out of the perimeter. Like you're essentially eliminating their ability to space the floor because what you're doing is you're either forcing them to run pick and roll, which is usually a nightmare against Texas Tech just due to the ability that the Red Raiders essentially just render it useless because they're going to switch and they can switch and they'll keep up with you there. And I mean, we don't see big men primarily getting into the corners and taking threes. I think we've seen Bryson Williams do that a couple of times this season, but even then, it's not something that we see a lot of. You can't force the ball back to the top of the key if you have the ball on the wing, or else Texas Tech will steal it. Those are kind of those free safety situations that we see from Terrence Shannon and Malik Wilson all the time. And so I feel like this is a really deliberate strategy that Mark Adams has baked into his system. And I think that's actually something that I think is going to play a big, big part in this game. I think with no Elijah Harkless, you're going to be hurting a little bit more for three-point shooting. He was a 36% shooter in Big 12 play, was averaging the second most attempts on the team. I think that they're going to try and find a way to get Tanner Groves more involved in this game. And I think if you're Moser and you're watching the tape, you know that you're just not going to be able to force it down low. I mean, Texas Tech has shown that in a number of games this year that if you're going to beat Texas Tech, it's not going to be from the inside. And so I think that there's going to be a concentrated effort to once again free up Umoja Gibson, free up Jordan Goldwire, as you mentioned, not a great three-point shooter, but a guy that will definitely get to the rim effectively. And so I think that we could see something from Groves and just trying to get him involved in different ways besides the post. And I think One of my keys to the game is making sure that he doesn't get open for those looks, making sure that you've kind of tightened up your rotations, that you're not letting him sneak off the ball, and that you're not letting him get open looks. I think that Mark Adams has proven that his scheme has worked against that, but I think just given with the lack of scoring, with Harkless done for the year, I think that if you can take care of that, you're in really, really good shape in this game.
All right, so while you were talking, I was looking on the player game finder. There have been a total of 6 forwards since Mark Adams introduced the no middle defense to have been able to put up or to make at least 4 threes that would classify as either a forward or a big. And I'm going to discount one of them because I know personally watching tape that he was not in the archetype of that, and that's Caleb Martin, because even though he's listed as a forward, he basically played as a guard. So you're looking at 5 years worth of data basically. And the only guys that have been able to do that are John Grant from Savannah State, a team that played ridiculously up tempo. You had Lamont West for West Virginia in a game where they got blown out. And then you had J.D. Miller, Trace Young, and Jalen Bridges. And Bridges is more of a 3-and-D guy. So you're talking about out of 5 years worth of playing a good amount of stretch bigs. You played Brady Manick a number of times. Obviously, you played Groves this year. You played Noah Horschler in Providence. You've played a number of guys over the years. And really, the only stretch big off of that list I can really think of was the J.D. Miller from TCU. And that was one singular game 3 years ago. No other big has really been able to pull off the 4 threes in a game. I think you have a really good point on the ability to keep guys from shooting from the top of the key or from the wings. That's something the Tech's defense does so well, because really the open threes that you're going to get are going to come off of those skip passes. They're going to come from the corner, or occasionally you'll get a breakdown that leads to an open pull up, but most of the time it's going to be off of assist to the corner. And so that really doesn't fit what a big is looking for. And I would say in this game, to add on to potential kind of tip, it's just simply going to be, you don't have to respect the spacing for Oklahoma as much as you would normal team. You can really afford to kind of dig in on Groves and make sure you're tracking Gibson really well. And obviously, I think some of that's going to be helped out again by him having to play more as a ball handler. But when they're playing him more off ball, you can really kind of focus on shadowing off of guys like Hill and like Goldwire, because neither of them have shown that they're able to be consistent shooters. And that's something, I mean, Jalen Hill literally hit his only 3 of conference play against Tech last game. And sure, he might get another one, right? But at the end of the day, those guys that Oklahoma has on the perimeter are not good shooters, and outside of Gibson. So just in general, being able to run them off the line, I think you can afford to play a more aggressive style of defense and really sort of play the passing lanes well, just because of their lack of perimeter shooting. And that's something that teams that have struggled to shoot against Tech, Oklahoma's been really kind of the outlier, being able to have a lot of success this year, because most of the other teams that have that disparity in three-point shooting haven't been able to put up the requisite amount of points on the inside. And for one, I think it speaks to the amount of talent that Porter Moser has as a coach and his ability to scheme up plays, because, I mean, if you look at the roster in a vacuum, this is not one that you would say matches up particularly well against Tech, but yet they were able to have probably the best performance out of any team this whole year against this defense. So, I mean, we'll see. I don't think this is a guaranteed win by any means, but I certainly think that there's a lot that Mark Adams can do to really kind of limit the shot attempts that you see from Groves and Gibson, because this roster is just kind of devoid of a lot of spacing outside of those guys. And I think obviously Groves fits the archetype of a guy that Tech has had a lot of success against. And Gibson's going to be having to play a role that sort of isn't quite as beautiful as what you saw him be able to do in the first game, just because of the absence of Harkless.
2 more keys to the game for me personally, and these are going to sound brutally obvious, but it's really just fix the things that got you beat in the last contest. That's grade A analysis from me, man. But I mean, truthfully, if you're going to beat Texas Tech, the things you've got to do are turn the ball over less than they do and get second chance points. Make the most out of every single possession. Oklahoma did that very, very well. They exploited Texas Tech's just ability to, or lack of an ability to move the ball offensively, and then Oklahoma crashed the glass and they got second chance points. If you're Texas Tech, don't let them do either of those things. Address those 2 concerns, box out, protect the ball, move the ball, distribute the ball, and get good shots. I think that you are more than capable of doing that. I don't know why you hit a wall in this first game. Obviously, Moser's a good coach, a good scheme. Oklahoma executed really well in this game. But again, I think that those are the two things that whenever I'm looking at the box score, it's overwhelmingly obvious that those are the two things that got Texas Tech beat, other than a dude having a 30-point night. Like that's not going to happen every other day. And so I think that it really comes down to addressing those two things and making sure that a guy doesn't go off for 30 again. But I do feel confident with Texas Tech's ability to win this game, especially given that it is at home. I think that that's a big, big thing for me and a big talking point for Texas Tech to be able to win this game, because at this point, Texas Tech has shown no other reason to pick against them at home. And so I am going to pick a Red Raiders victory. I think it'll be a little bit high scoring. I'm a little bit interested to see what Oklahoma looks like offensively. They did not look good in the Iowa State game, and I think that this game actually might end up being a little bit similar to that final score, maybe a little bit less aggressive than Iowa State played them. I'm going to pick Texas Tech win this game. 72-60. I think that'll be my final score prediction. Texas Tech gets some more offense on the board after a little bit of a rock fight in Austin, while Oklahoma is still trying to figure things out on the offensive end without Harkless.
Yeah, for me, it just comes down to Tech has consistently been a better shooting team at home than they have been on the road. And one of the things that really doomed them in that first game was the inability to hit any sort of three. And sure, they had some difficult ones, but they also had quite a few open ones that just did not go for them. And you look at the individual splits for guys like Adonis Arms and Kevin O'Banner, significantly better at home than on the road. And that's something that's going to be controlled by the environment. I certainly think Gibson's performance was an outlier. He's still going to be possibly someone to watch out for to have a really nice game, but I just don't see this team having the offense in terms of sheer talent to be able to keep up with Tech. And for me, I'm going to go against a recent trend. I'm going to pick this one to be more low scoring, even though it is at home, because I do think Oklahoma found a really good way to defend Tech in that first game. And while we've seen that Tech has had success against teams like Baylor or TCU, nobody's been able to put that kind of pressure on Bryson Williams to make passes out of the post and really just shut down Tech's post offense like that. And so I think this is going to be a test for Tech's offense, and I'm going to kind of hedge and say that they're able to win the game and win so fairly comfortably, but with a score of 67-56 would be my final. So relatively low scoring. I think it's going to be somewhat comfortable, but still some questions to be answered offensively.
Very fair prediction. That's a game that was very similar to the Iowa State game that they just played, and I think that Texas Tech is a team that's similar to Iowa State but has better things going for it offensively. So excited to see how this one pans out on Tuesday night. Thanks for joining us today as we took a look again at the Oklahoma Sooners. Until game time, you can keep up with us on Twitter. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eracer41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at LockedOnTTU. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube if you have not already. Subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts and leave us a review if possible. It helps us out a lot. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.